University Grant Commission has nominated Central Institute of Higher Tibetan Studies to offer massive open online courses on the platform of Swayam. So in these courses, we have 4 courses to offer. So we are proud to offer this course on Swayam platform on Pali and Buddhist studies, and we wish that this would be beneficial to the students and those who take up these courses. So this institute is primarily established in 1967 as envisioned by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Government of India for the preservation of Tibetan culture and Tibetan studies. Here in this the courses which are being offered, there are 4 courses: the history of Indian Buddhism, the fundamentals of Abhidhamma in Pali, and the Buddhist philosophy, and then finally the Buddhist tourism. In the first course, the history of Indian Buddhism, we provide the background to the origin of Buddhism, and then the biography of the Buddha in previous lives, then the biography of Buddha Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha, and how he, the situations which has driven him to take the decision of renunciation from the royal life, Abhinish Karmana, and then how he went through the series of practices and finally attained the Buddhahood at Bodh Gaya under the peepal tree known as the Bodhi tree. And thereafter, the first Dharma sermon was given in Sarnath, and according to the Mahayana tradition, there are 3 Dharma sermons, or the Dhammacakkappavattana. The first Dhammacakkappavattana at Sarnath on the topic of the 4 Noble Truths, and then the second Dhammacakkappavattana on Rajagriha Parvata, where he gave teaching on the Pragyaparamita Sutra, and then the final, or the third, the Dhammacakkappavattana in Vaishali. And also after the demise of the Buddha, passing away of the Buddha, there had been various the councils, the first Buddhist council, second Buddhist council, and the third Buddhist councils, in which they collected the teachings of the Buddha. And then we have also here in the courses providing how Buddhism was patroned by the kings of various period. And then after that, the course also deals about the decline of Buddhism in India and what are the reasons for the decline. And then prior to that, there is also mention about how Buddhism spread in ancient time in the rest of the entire Asian countries. So like the Theravada Buddhism, how it got spread in the South Asian countries like Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Myanmar. And the Mahayana tradition, how they got spread in China in the beginning, in 2nd century, and then in Tibet in 7th century onward, and from China it went to Korea, in Japan, and Vietnam, whereas from Tibet it went to Mongolia and Russian states, and then it went to Nepal and Bhutan and other parts of the Asian countries. So this gives you a brief idea about how the Buddhism evolved and then how it spread into various countries in Asia. And then we have the second course which talks about the fundamentals of Abhidhamma in Pali. And in the Abhidhamma itself deals about the metaphysics, and particularly it deals about the mind, because in Buddhist spiritual practice as well as in philosophical kind of the system, the mind is a very important matter to be discussed, because the spiritual practice is dependent on how we transform our mind. So there are wholesome consciousnesses, unwholesome consciousness, and neutral consciousness. So whether any consciousness is unwholesome or wholesome depends on the state of mind, where the mental aspects have certain aspects of attachment, anger, jealousy, and these kind of negativities or destructive emotions are associated, then that becomes unwholesome consciousness or unwholesome mind. When it is associated with the compassion, patience, and loving kindness, these are the constructive and wholesome mental aspects, which and also we call that the mental factors. Any action that is whether the wholesome or unwholesome or virtuous or unvirtuous action depends on the motivational state of the mind. At the motivational state, if the mind is wholesome or virtuous, then action becomes virtuous. And if at the motivational state, if the mind is non-virtuous, associated with attachment, anger, jealousy, and hatred and things like that, then the action becomes unwholesome. So therefore, in Buddhism, the motivational state of mind is extremely important, and at the same time, the mental state during the action is also very important, and the mental state after the completion of the action is also extremely important. So whether any action or any verbal or physical action becomes virtuous or non-virtuous is totally depend on the motivational state or the mental state which is behind the action. And then how we can achieve this in Abhidhamma, how the wholesome mental state can be created, generated, and developed through meditational processes. These are discussed thoroughly. And then how the destructive emotions, destructive minds, they can be reduced, they can be eliminated through meditational process. These are discussed in great detail. And then through that, how Nibbana or Nirvana can be achieved. So this is the whole kind of process of the mental transformational kind of process and the state through which one can attain Nibbana. Then we have in the third course, we have Buddhist philosophy. And in Buddhist philosophy, the course describes about what was the metaphysical view at the time of the Buddha advent and Buddha's lifetime, and then what were the major kind of the philosophical views of the Buddha. For example, the anatta or anitya, anatta in Pali and anitya in Sanskrit, and the impermanence, because this is regarded to be extremely important to understand and realize the impermanence, because realization and understanding of impermanence has a great and deep impact on our daily life. And then how that understanding and realization can drive our action and our mental states into a more wholesome kind of state. Therefore, the anitya, understanding of impermanence, that can reduce attachment, that can reduce destructive mind like hatred and anger and jealousy and things like that. And in the same manner, the pratitya samutpada, dependent arising, is also extremely important, because this is one of the very fundamental teachings of the Buddha that can be found in all the Buddhist schools and with a little bit of differences in their interpretation. More subtle, the higher the school you ascend on, then you can find more subtle kind of, the philosophical views of dependent arising, the pratitya samutpada. Then you can find the Buddha's criticism of a caste system and gender inequality. And then in the Buddhist philosophical schools, you find the schools related with the Mahayana, Vaibhashika schools and the Swatantrika schools. So you can also find the Vijnanavada school or the Chittamadrin school, and the Madhyamika school, the middle centralist school. And also they talk about the Buddhist epistemology and Buddhist logic, and how they they gave a contribution, they made a contribution to the Indian knowledge system and Indian philosophical systems, because in ancient time there was a very strong and rich interaction between Buddhist schools and the non-Buddhist Indian philosophical schools on the topic of various issues of the various matters and issues of philosophy, epistemology and logic. And because of this rich interaction, there was a very rich advancement in all the schools because of such a rich interaction. And in Buddhism, in Madhyamika school, which is regarded to be the highest level of Buddhist school, that talks about the interpretation of interdependence as the at the highest level, and it is known as the philosophy of shunyata, or philosophy of emptiness. But here the emptiness is not just empty of existence, but here the emptiness is emptiness of inherent existence, emptiness of the absolute entity, emptiness of independent existence. These are negated, and because Madhyamika philosophy, Madhyamikas believe that whatever we perceive as independent entity, we perceive as a substantial entity, we perceive as everything that we perceive as concrete and inherently existent entity. So because of that, that drives our consciousness and mental state into taking things as independent, and then that drives to attachment and craving and aversion and things like that. So in order to address these different levels of the negative emotions, there is a need of understanding of the reality, the nature of reality. Once we have a better understanding and a proper understanding of the nature of reality, then that undermines the very foundation of a mental state, which drives towards the attachment and anger and attraction towards objects. So many of these are dealt in the philosophy of Buddhism, and in that philosophy of Buddhist course, we have also the later manifestations of Buddhism into different kind of areas, like the engaged Buddhism, and then we also have projected the lives of the great masters of Buddhism in modern age, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama as a modern Buddhist leader, and then the most venerable Thich Nhat Hanh's approach to Buddhism, and S.N. Goenkaji's approach to Buddhism, and how they have contributed to Buddhism and humanity in general. These are discussed in the course of philosophy. And also we have covered some of the texts like Ratnavali, in which how Acharya Nagarjuna has projected his the socio-political concept, which is extremely valuable, which can still be applied in the modern society, where the subject or the citizen-centered kind of administration and governance is the projected. And also he has mentioned about the qualifications of the ministers to be appointed, not on the basis of certain kind of political angle, but also based on their the ethical qualifications, based on their understanding of the socio and the system of the society. These are, I think, very important in the modern context, which can, the modern society and modern governments can learn a lot from these ideas. Then we have the fourth course on Buddhist tourism, in which many of the tourist places are described, and then because in India we have so many places of the tourists which are associated with the Buddhism, and for example the Lumbini, which is in Nepal, and also the Bodh Gaya, Sarnath, Rajgir and Shravasti, the Kushinagar, Nalanda, Vikramashila, Ratnagiri, Lalitgiri, Udayagiri, Amravati, Sanchi, Nagarjunakonda, Ajanta and Ellora. So these are very important, and there are so many monuments in India, even outside India also, which in ancient time these were within the India's territory, like Pakistan and Afghanistan and those places where we can still find many monuments related to Buddhism. And in India, the so far excavated places of Buddhism have lots of places for tourism, and there are many more to be excavated which are yet to be explored, and then which may unfold many places and important kind of history related to Buddhism. So I hope that these 4 courses would be extremely important and would be quite enriching in terms of the knowledge about Buddhism, the philosophy about Buddhism, the spirituality about Buddhism, and the historical places related to Buddhism. So I hope that although this is a very brief course, and the 4 courses are relatively quite brief, however, it will open a window through which you can advance further for more studies and deeper studies. Thank you very much.